Well, welcome back to our Intro in Biblical Hebrew. We graduated a few sessions back from the alphabet to syllables to full words, and now we're kind of moving beyond that, and our next few topics are going to get us more into looking at combinations of words and how one word in the sentence can relate to another in different ways. And one of the key ways that we'll start doing that is with adjectives. In English, our adjectives are words that modify or they limit, describe, or characterize a noun. So the blue book, the big dog, for example, blue and big are both adjectives. The point is that they add specificity to a noun. Now, this is the same function that we have in Hebrew, so knowing our English grammar is, again, kind of half the battle, revisiting some of those old concepts from like high school English class. But the order of the day for this topic is to focus on adjectives and ask how they qualify Hebrew nouns and ask how they're coordinated with Hebrew nouns. And we'll do this by detecting their function in a sentence as well as some patterns for recognizing those functions in a sentence. That will be kind of most of our conversation here in this session. And then at the very end, we'll tack on a short secondary topic from Ross that was included from this chapter. And that will have to do with how two Hebrew particles, small words, prepositions in fact, are used to show comparisons between one entity and the next. So something is lesser or greater than the other. And that'll be kind of what we'll finish off with for today. But why don't we dive into adjectives and see if we can't make some sense out of them. All right, we thought we left nouns behind, but in a way we didn't. Here I want to start off with some good news. The good news for us today is that if you know those noun patterns even reasonably well, especially recognizing those endings, then you'll be able to identify an adjective. Even better, if that weren't good enough, for adjectives, we can do this. There is no such thing, almost no such thing as a dual adjective. Really the only place we'll see dual adjectives are in those few cases that deal mostly with numbers. Pairs of things, for example, where we'll see a dual adjective. But for the most part, again, 99% of our occurrences, we're going to be focusing on these top four quadrants. Adjectives only show up with nouns that are either singular or plural or masculine or feminine, and they use those same noun endings. So this is our noun chart that we know, but I'll point you to page 81 in our textbook by Ross. There he gives us an adjective chart using the adjective tov, or good. And what you're seeing there is those four quadrants, masculine, feminine, singular, plural, using that adjective tov, but these same endings. Tov, tova, tovim, tovot. If we go back to our noun pattern here, it's sus, susim, torah, torot. Those are our examples. So what we're highlighting then in these in this noun pattern here are these endings that we already know how they behave. The only difference then here is that we are going to, instead of having nouns like sus, we're going to be adding different vocabulary words here like tov, which are adjectives. One last thing we could say, if that weren't all good enough, those little guidelines we learned last session on vowel reduction patterns for some nouns, remember segolate nouns and monosyllabic nouns, that also works here. So essentially there's nothing new in terms of the grammatical forms we've been recognizing. The only thing that's new really is the vocab we're going to use to build on those forms. The new components will deal with syntax and how we recognize their function in a sentence, but in terms of how they're built, it's working with that same pattern of endings from the noun table that we have here and we've been looking at, but it's just doing that with a new set of words. So let's leave that behind and start to focus on this question of recognition. In biblical Hebrew, there are three types of adjectives. The first type we're going to look at is attributive adjectives. And these are ones that we're probably most familiar with. They describe something about a noun, a quality, a characteristic. So that example of the blue book or the big dog, those are adjectives, blue and big, that are telling us something about the noun. So they're attributive. In Hebrew, we also have attributive adjectives, but the way we recognize them is by their agreement with the noun. In fact, it's by their full agreement. So this will be kind of one thing that we could have as a takeaway today. Because in biblical Hebrew, if a noun and an adjective are connected in a way that suggests the adjective is attributive, the noun and the adjective will agree on 3 points. They will both have the same gender, they'll both have the same number, so they'll be singular or plural, and the same definite status. They will either both have a definite article or neither of them will. They fully agree on all 3 points: gender, number, and definite status. The reverse is also true. If they're both indefinite, then they won't have the article. So for us, think 3 agree. If you have an adjective and a noun, you're trying to sort out what type of adjective. For it to be an attributive adjective, there has to be the definite article on both or neither, and they have to be the same number, singular or plural, and the same gender, masculine or feminine. So why don't we look at a few examples and see how this plays out in real time, if you will. The example on the bottom left here, we've got a picture of New York City. What kind of city would we say this is? You could describe it in many ways. Busy, expensive, exciting. Here, I've got an example that actually comes out of the Hebrew Bible. You'll find this phrase in Jonah 1:2. Ha'ir hagdolah. Ha'ir hagdolah. We should be able to recognize everything that's happening on that in that phrase now. We have Ha'ir, the city, Hagdolah, Gadol. That means that's our word for greatness, our adjective for greatness. So how do we translate that? Well, we can see that there's agreement here on a few points. First off, we see these both have our definite articles, so there's agreement. We could also see that there aren't any plural endings on the noun, so they're both singular. There's agreement there in terms of their number. There's also agreement in their gender. Gedolah. If we look at our table on page 81, that would be a feminine singular pattern, much like Tovah. Now this is where things get tricky, because ir, we don't have that ending here, but we could imagine that it's there because this is one of those words that is just feminine in its lexical form. So we could say here, the great city. There's agreement in gender, number, and definite status. So that would be an example of an attributive adjective. Let's look at our other example here. We all know who this is. This is Yoda. Again, you could describe him as many things. He could be short, hairy, green, creepy, something like that. But this term here actually also comes out of the Hebrew Bible, 2 Samuel 13:3. Ish hakam me'od. Ish hakam me'od. Ish means a man. Hakam, wise. Me'od, very much. What we're seeing here is all three of these terms, ish is our noun, hakam and me'od are adjectives. Nowhere in there do we see our definite article, so they all agree in the sense that they're indefinite. And also we could see that we have 3 nouns that are singular, and they agree in their gender as well. So we would translate that as a very wise man. Me'od, very, hakam, wise, ish, man. A very wise man. So we're looking for agreement there. 3 agree is a thing to remember, and that will be a way of making sense out of any attributive adjective in the Hebrew Bible. Okay, next on the docket are our predicate adjectives. And these are adjectives that don't describe a quality or characteristic of a noun. Rather, they assert something about it. So our example, the book is good. In English, that is a predicate adjective, the adjective being good. One thing that we can note here is that for us to make sense of predicate adjectives in English, we need a verb. We need a simple verb based on that verb to be. And that is or are is what we need in English. That's our problem because we need verbs in every sentence in English. In Hebrew, we can get away without it. So when we come to translate the predicate adjectives, we're going to need some help. And we are going to include simple forms of that verb to be in every predicate adjective. So if it's a predicate adjective, you need to include as a helping word is, the book is good for singulars, or are for plurals. So the books are good. So that's something of their function, more or less. let's look at their form. How are we going to recognize these? If our big rule for the attributive adjective was that 3-agree rule, gender, number, definite status, the big difference here with predicates is they will in fact disagree in their definite status. The gender will be the same, the number will be the same, but their definite status will not be the same. One further hint that can be helpful is the predicate adjective likes to come before the noun, not always, but often. So if we see a noun after its adjective, that's another hint that we're dealing with a predicate adjective. So why don't we just look quickly at a throwback example here. We're used to seeing the word melech as king, thinking of ancient kings, but we are a Canadian university. Let's use a modern king. Let's look at Wayne Gretzky playing for the LA Kings. He's good. He's great. How would we describe that in Hebrew? Well, we would use a predicate adjective. Tov hamelech. Now, if we break this down, we can see that both of these nouns are, or both of these forms, the noun melech and the form tov, are singular. So we can mark that off as an agreement. We could also see that they're masculine. Melech is masculine, the form tov is masculine. But one thing we're not seeing on the adjective is our definite article. There's disagreement here, therefore it's a predicate adjective, and we would have to translate this as the king is good. So that's our predicates. We've looked at our attributives. Let's look at one last form of the adjectives, and then we'll move on. Well, let's complete our trio of Hebrew adjectives by looking at what are probably the easiest ones to identify. We're looking at substantive adjectives. If the first type, attributive, were characterizing or describing something about a noun, and the second type, those predicate adjectives, were asserting something about a noun, the way we recognize these is that they're acting as if they're a noun. The substantive adjective doesn't have a noun that it's agreeing with, rather it's standing in independently in the position of a noun. So I just want to start with or show an example of what this looks like. Hatovim. Hatovim. And since we had a throwback example to the early 90s in the last slide, I thought we'd give another one here that more or less works. Our adjective here is tov. That's a simple adjective. That was one of our examples from our chapter this week. Tovim, we can see that's plural because we have our ending. Tovim. This was our simple adjective tov. And we also see that we have the definite article. We can recognize everything that's going on here. Now, how to translate that is where things perhaps are a little bit different. But once we get used to seeing them, it should be simple enough. Hatovim. That could be simply translated as the good, as in if you're describing a concept of what is good, the good, the right, the just, the beautiful. Those are all substantive adjectives in Hebrew. In Hebrew, this can also be used to describe a set of things or a collection of things that are good together. And here's where this example comes in, where we might want to translate this as the good ones or the good men, hence our old school example over here. The reason why we might want to do that is if this was describing a collection of individuals, in this case we have a masculine ending here, then we would probably translate that as the good men or the good ones. That substantive adjective can be a way of pointing to an entire body of individuals that are good. If this was hatovot, that would be feminine, so we would translate that as the good women or the good ones in a gender-neutral term as well. So that's what we're talking about for our three types of adjectives. They behave differently and they're recognized differently. So think 3-agree for attributive, think disagreement in definite status for the predicate, and think substantive, they're just a lone wolf, standalone, and we should be fine when it comes to encountering these in sentences for translation. Recently we met the preposition min, and we worked through the main patterns of how it will appear with a noun. Remember, this preposition was one that we said operated both in the world of inseparable prepositions and those independent prepositions. It could show up with a makef, or it could be on the front end of a noun, and we would have that nun assimilation that we talked about, and we'll see even in our example. So if that was its formation, now we're going to look at one of the important ways it function in a sentence. And the term we're going to use for that to describe any function of any grammatical item in a sentence is syntax. So we're going to be talking more about syntax in the weeks and months ahead. The syntax of min, one of the functions of it is to show comparison between two items. So far we've said that this word will mean from or some of, but when it's used in a comparative sense, it is showing that one item is bigger, better, bolder than another. Probably the best way to highlight this is to just look at an example like we have here. So this first example, we have tova. There should be a comments under there. Tova, in blue even. Chochma mizahav. Tova, chochma mizahav. So if we want to talk about what each of these items are, we have tova, good, chochma, wisdom, mizahav. And what we're seeing there is our min with our assimilated nun in the zayin, zahav meaning gold. A very wooden translation of this would be wisdom is good from gold. But that's not really getting at what this is saying. What it's saying is wisdom, chokhmah, is better, gooder, is better than gold. And where that word than is coming from is our preposition min, giving us that comparative sense. So for comparisons where you have something that is less or more, greater or stronger, better or worse, we're going to use min, and we'll see that in a chain of adjectives and nouns like this. The original translation would be very wooden, so we need to iron that out into something like wisdom is better than gold. So that's if you're showing something's better or worse, let's just say. We met another preposition a few weeks back, many weeks back now at this point, our inseparable prepositions. One of them was k. Remember, as, like, according to. This is one of the prepositions, or the preposition, that we use to express equality between two items. They're the same. They're not better or worse. They're the same in quality or character. And our example here, we can see that below. Lavan kasegel. Lavan, that's a word meaning white. Kasegel, segel meaning snow. So what we're talking about here is this item. We know that k is our inseparable preposition. We know that when we have, we add that with the definite article, then we will have this patach show up under the preposition, and that's what we have right here. So the end translation would be lavan, white, ka, as the segel, snow. White as the snow. So that's how we're going to express that two items are equal in biblical Hebrew. Min comparisons take a bit more working with the translation to get that better than, but here it's more or less we're translating form for form, word for word. So that's our tour through adjectives with a bit of a bonus item for some syntactical uses of our prepositions. I hope that was helpful. Now let's press on to the next topic.